Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Myths Matter with James Portnow. Someday I am going. Nah, that's probably not true. I was going to say I will not be recording this on an iPad. I'm going to get a real setup, but probably not. Anyway, today we're here to talk about Anansi, and I'm actually super excited to talk about Anansi because these stories were a ton of fun to do. For me personally, as a writer, it was an interesting task because a lot of the Anansi stories are very, very short stories. So I had to sort of stitch them together into one, or actually two, overarching narratives. Some of these stories are actually only a couple of paragraphs, or sometimes I even found ones that were a few sentences long. But the character is so good and so much fun that it was a blast to do, and I would highly recommend if you get a chance, look up some other Anansi stories because it's just such a great archetypical trickster character. But that said, there's something I really wanted to talk about this particular piece because you can't really talk about Anansi without talking about the Atlantic slave trade. And I know, heavy segue there, but one of the things I had to think about a lot with this was what source material to use, because Anansi exists as West African myths, but Anansi obviously also exists as the myths coming out of slave cultures in the Americas. And very specifically, Haiti, there's a lot of Anansi stories coming out of Haiti. And if you watch the upcoming Haitian Revolution series on Extra History, you'll learn more about that culture. But we are faced, when we deal with some of these myths, especially myths out of Africa, with this question of what do we call the original myth, or what do we call the, canon here, right? And for me, I decided that I was actually going to take myths, parts of these legends from both the Haitian legends and the West African legends, because fundamentally there's two ways you could go about it. Way one is you say, these are distinct cultures and should be shown as distinct cultures, and the Haitian and American versions of these myths are basically versions of these myths that have been brought over, but that weren't brought over by the traditional storytellers, that were just people trying to keep their culture alive and retelling these myths. And so these myths got changed a lot and got changed to sort of incorporate aspects of people's new lives in the Americas. The other way of looking at it is saying this shows a continuous tie between the culture that existed as slaves in the Americas and West African culture. And while it's very important to recognize and realize that, especially over time, these are two distinct cultures that are each vibrant, that each have their own cultural value, in this case, I thought it was also really important to recognize that despite a lot of slave owners and slaveholders' attempts to sort of crush West African culture out of their slaves and trying to totally supplant the native culture that these people came with, it's important to show that continuous tie and to say that despite all these attempts, they were actually not successful, that cultural heritage lives on, and even cultures with people from plenty of different language groups where communication was difficult, some of these shared stories maintained that connection to their homeland, and shared stories were something that they could use to communicate with each other. So I felt like it was really important to sort of say that both the American and especially Haitian Anansi stories are Anansi stories, and the traditional West African Anansi stories are Anansi stories, and they're both legitimate in canon. Those words may not even mean much, but I just felt like it was really important to say we were going to treat them equally, and we were going to say they're both Anansi stories and incorporate them both into our Anansi retelling. So especially if you had heard different versions of these stories when you were watching this mythology and you were like, hey, I heard a slightly different version of that. Well, there are a lot of versions out, but it's probably that divide that happened across the Atlantic slave trade that you heard the other version of. But yeah, that's it from me. Take care, everyone.